Hello my friends and welcome back to From Good to Great. I want to talk about commander abilities now. Now I know that there are a few videos out there and a few guides that cover commander abilities and just basically tell you what is good and what isn't good. Now I can tell you what is good and what isn't good as well, and many of you would obviously quite like that opinion or prefer that opinion to perhaps some of the opinions of others, but I want to get away from the whole idea of people just having an opinion about how powerful something is or isn't. And instead, I want to talk to you about what I do. Like what's going on in my head when I look at these abilities. When I actually sit down with a notepad and try and work out what is the best or what isn't the best. And here is the thing. You need to compare these abilities to some amount of core slots. So in this game, I've kind of decided that your power is really measured in core slots, right? Core slots translate directly into extra units, and extra units can just do whatever you like. You know, extra artillery, extra fighter planes, extra tanks, whatever. There is a level of power that comes with core slots, and the units are sort of relatively balanced with each other. So that core slot measurement of power is actually a pretty useful benchmark for us to use to work out which of these abilities are the best. So I'm just going to go through them all, and then we can give them a core slot rating, and that may be perhaps better in your mind, gives you an idea of how powerful some of these abilities are. So let's start. So Infantry General reduces the cost of infantry units by 25%. Now, the top infantry unit, or the most useful infantry unit for the Germans at least, are pioneers and engineers, which you would primarily use to push enemy infantry out of cities, which is quite an important role. They are 4 core slots each. And right up until the 1943 campaign and beyond, about 5 or 6 is the absolute most that you will ever want. Because in a lot of the early games, you know, your army is only like 56 core slots wide, and you will not need more than 4 or 5 regiments of infantry. And by the time your core slots expand to over 100 or whatever, and you get towards the very later parts of the war, that's the point when tanks become way better than infantry for cleaning. Basically, tanks end up doing everything that infantry used to do. Engineers are still useful for getting rid of mines and potentially pushing particularly stubborn infantry out of particularly entrenched city positions. But generally speaking, tanks will get the job done. So I can only give this a rating of 4 to 6 core slots, right? Because we save 1 core slot for every pioneer we buy, and we're going to buy at least 4 or 5. And that allows us to get 1 more, which is worth about 4 core slots. 4 to 6, so if we run 6 infantry, we've saved 6 core slots. That's not big for 2 points. 6 core slots for 2 points is not that good. So I wouldn't recommend Infantry General as an ability. Next, Panzer General is the exact same thing but with tanks. Now in the early game, it's probably once again about on the same level as Infantry General. You are going to want about 4 to 5 tanks. And a lot of the early tanks are around the 3 to 4 core slot mark if you start over strengthening them or anything along those lines. Now, as the war progresses, tanks get better and better and better, and you will want more and more and more tanks. So this is an ability that actually gains core slot power over the course of a grand campaign. Eventually, if looking at the start positions of some of the later parts of the campaign is anything to go by, you're going to want about 14 to 20 tanks. Now at that point, this ability is giving you effectively between 16 and 32 core slots worth of power, extra core slots to spend on something else. And that's pretty huge. So, in the early game, perhaps not the best ability, but it will grow into a very powerful ability over time as you add tanks, and you will want to add tanks. So definitely consider this ability. I would rate it in the early game as a 6 to 8 core slot ability, but rising all the way up to like 30 plus, to, you know, as your war progresses and you add more tanks, you save more core slots, which means you can add more tanks or anything else that you might need. Industry connections was something I thought was going to be really good, and it turned out not to be. The reason why is because, so I'll just give you an example. There's a prototype tank that you can get quite early on, the flame waffle. Hans gets the flame waffler. I shall bring the blueberry sauce. Now, when you're indulging yourself in German war crimes, you get to this point where you realize that not only do you have to buy these units, same with captured units. When you capture units, you have to then buy them after you've captured them, which is a pain. But anyway, not such a big deal. In People's General and Panzer General, you got given prototype units. So you didn't have to buy them. So they were basically like free units. In this game, you have to buy them, but also they're limited supply. So if you get given 20 of the old flame wafflers, which it's a great tank because it's basically a PZ4, but it has the engineer's ability ignore entrenchment, so it's just perfect for getting rid of infantry in cities in the early game. When you take losses, and you will take losses, they come out of your pool. So if you get given 15 of the old waffle, and you lose 2 in a battle, then you have 13 left. And there's no guarantee that you'll get any more of them. So eventually you will have to phase out the prototype unit. You know, unless it's like artillery or something that you could really protect and really prevent it from ever taking any losses. You know, it is only a single point, but how much is one unit worth to you? Or 2 units? Or, you know, imagine, so with our industry connections, we get a unit that is 1.5 times better than a standard tank, okay? Or 1.5 times better than a standard artillery. Well, a standard artillery is like 4 core slots, and a top-of-the-range artillery is about 6 or 7. So, if it's 1.5 times better, we're gaining 3 core slots worth of power over the standard, right? So, through your industry connections, you might be empowering your army by the equivalent of about 3 core slots, presuming that you get something useful that you can actually use per mission. And you might not get anything useful. You might get some prototypes that are just not actually interesting in any way. So, yeah, I would rate this at somewhere between 3 to 6 core slots worth of power. And you might get something really nice, but if you do, and it's a frontline unit, there's no guarantee that you can restock it. So that ability is gonna fade away. Over the course of a 30, 40 long mission grand campaign, you're gonna want power that sticks around, not fleeting power. So, I mean, it's only a single point, and it is cool to see the new units and stuff, but this is nowhere near the power that I wanted from this ability. So, there you go. That's my rating for that one. Liberator is probably the only S-grade ability in this entire set. The core slot power of it is absolutely off the charts. The only thing I might say is that if you're playing on easy, it's probably not that useful to you, because on easy or medium, you'll probably be swimming in prestige, but certainly on the harder difficulties, you know, even the smallest map, the early game maps, have got about 6 to 8 cities to capture, and that's going to be about 400 to 500 prestige. And as the maps get bigger and there's more cities to capture and so on, you might be getting like 1,000 prestige a battle out of this. And 1,000 prestige buys you probably a good 12 core slots worth of units every single map. So there's a huge amount of power behind this, and if you are playing on the hardest difficulty, where your prestige has been reduced by 75%, your default prestige and per turn prestige has been dropped by 75%, this is huge. You'll be living your war chest off of Liberator. It's an excellent ability, and it has a really high core slot value. Don't leave your campaign without it. So, an easy pick, and especially because any prestige that you make and you don't spend it, you keep it, right? Seems obvious enough. So if I make, in the first mission, I make 600 prestige off of Liberator, and I only spend about 200 of it, well, I've just carried like 4 to 6 core slots worth of power into the next map, and so on and so on and so on. So you can actually build up a huge amount of power from Liberator over time. Yeah, probably the only mandatory pick in the entire list. Click this box and then decide what else you want after. Right, next. Deep Recon. I like this because I was playing blind and it only cost a single point. But when you actually really sit down and think about it, the core slot value of this is very, very low. Like, really low. It's a 5% extra accuracy bonus from recon units. Well, you can get a lot of recon units for just 1 or 2 core slots, maybe 3 core slots at most. So you could just buy another recon and deploy it and get a similar bonus by having 2 recons next to the enemy instead of 1. So it seems pretty obvious to me that the low core slot value of this really kind of ruins it, or it doesn't sell it to you. It is nice to see the, have the cities revealed and see what's around them and all that kind of stuff when you're first playing through the game. But the thing is, obviously, the game doesn't change, so when you play the game again and again and again, you're going to know what's in each city. You're going to know where the enemy where the enemy is deployed and all that kind of stuff. This kind of knowledge is going to come to you. You can always use, because the AI always throws its fighter planes at you. It throws its air force at you pretty early on, and so by the time you reach the point where you're crawling across the map to finish off the final objectives, the enemy's not going to have any air force anyway, so you can just send in a fighter plane straight to each city, and that will reveal the tile and all the tiles next to it. So effectively it's like sending a fighter plane to the city to see what's there. Not the biggest deal. So I would skip this one. I would give it a core slot rating of like 3 or 2. It's like worth an extra scout car, effectively. And the funny part is, it's only a multiplier of your scout cars, so if you don't, you can't really afford to have more than 1 or 2 scout cars because you're very limited on core slots in the early game. So you would rather get something else that's going to free up core slots and then deploy another scout than have this. Next, operational initiative. This is the skill that is the most hard to quantify. This bonus is actually pretty massive in the early game, but obviously on some maps the enemy is on your doorstep and you're fighting them immediately. This can actually be a huge bonus, causing you to take a lot less casualties. And conversely, on some maps you start quite far away and you have to attack an entrenched enemy on the other side of the map. By the time you get to the other side of the map, this bonus will have worn off. I think it has some real core slot potential, depending on the situation, but the inconsistency of it makes it a pretty poor pick. Still, it only costs 1, and it is a potential to save you perhaps 10s, maybe 20, 30 actual casualties across your entire army in the early phase of a serious engagement, of an engagement where you start right next to the enemy and they're literally on your case on turn 1. 4 initiative is like literally the amount of initiative that almost all infantry gets. So your initiative on the first turn will be double the enemy's. That means that during the combat phase, they'll shoot one guy on their side will shoot, then 2 of yours, 1 of theirs, 2 of yours, 1 of theirs, 2 of yours. You'll get more of your shots off before they get to fire back, so therefore you'll do more kills to them and you'll take less counterattack damage. So I know it's very situational. You could probably give it, In the right map, it could have a core slot value of like, say, 7 to 13 pretty easily. It would save you that many casualties, potentially, in a really ugly fight in a very early on. But in other battles, it might just be useless. So, one to consider, it's off and on power, and it's only a single point. And I'm not sure I would go for it. Master of Blitzkrieg allows you to get a bit of speed on your tanks. Honestly, it's kind of worthless if you really think about it. So say you've got 20 core slots worth of tanks. So unless this is making tanks twice as good, taking your 20 core slots to like 40, you know, it's not going to be that good, if you see what I mean. If it doubled the power of tanks, and you had 20 core slots worth of tanks, well then it's got a core slot power of 20, right? It's taking your tanks from your 20 core slots that you spent on them, and giving you the power of 40 core slots worth of tanks. But an extra movement is not that useful for tanks. They already have great movement, and a lot of the time you can't even see as far as they can move, which makes actually using their full movement sometimes quite risky. Now, being able to get across rivers a little bit easier is nice, and I believe there's a bug in this version of the game where your bridge pioneers don't work for some reason. But that'll be fixed. I guarantee that, you know, that issue will be resolved. So, you're probably looking at this having marginal utility across your tanks. So let's say it's got like 10% utility, and you've got 20 core slots worth of tanks. That gives this ability a core slot power of 2, which is terrible. So I would probably avoid this, although it does combine very nicely with perimeter control. Potentially combines very nicely with that. But that's you know, that's another ability with core slot value that's perhaps quite difficult to quantify. And generally speaking, enemy zone of control is not the biggest issue to deal with, because the AI is usually on the defense, which means that you have the space to move around them and encircle them and all that kind of thing. As the defender, or as the aggressor, preventing people from going through your zone of control is more important, because your units will be spread out and you don't want them just driving past and attacking your artillery. But as the defender, it's not so important. Right, Battle Academy. 1 star equals 8% more effectiveness in your unit. Well, actually, 16% more attack and 3% more defense. And the reason why I say 16% and not 8% is because you have most units have got an accuracy of 50%. So an extra 8% accuracy is actually worth twice as much than you might expect. If you had 100% accuracy and you got an extra 8%, like you magically got an extra 8% more damage or whatever, then it would be 8%, right? But you're actually from a position of 50% going up by 8%. So the value of that is actually much higher. So, 25% extra growth rate is going to mean, because it's 1000 EXP equals 1 star. It's as simple as that. So that means that when you go to 4 star, you're going to be on 5 stars instead, which is going to give you an extra 8%. 16% and 3%, right? So 16% of your total core slot value. So in the early game you have like 53 or 56 core slots, right? So let's just say 50 to make the math easy. We have 50 core slots worth of units, and eventually we are going to get a bonus of about 16% on all of them. So say 20% of 50, right, is 10 core slots, roughly. It's going to be lower than that, about 8 over time. And you might save a little bit of money not having to use elite replacements, where you might have used elite replacements because your unit is very close to maxed out or something along those lines. You're gaining EXP a little bit faster and you can afford to waste a bit on green replacements, etc. But yeah, there is a potential value there of about 7 to 10 core slots, which is not that huge when you think about it. And that's spread across your whole army, and it's going to take a little bit of time to see that benefit. There's going to be edge cases where you see that benefit, like if your unit would have been on 800 EXP, now it's over 1,000 and it's got 1 star when it wouldn't have had 1 star. So you're going to see that bonus. So the math on it is complicated, but it's not as powerful of an ability as you would think. But at 8 to 10 core slots, I would say it is potentially actually one of the more powerful abilities on this list, going by how we've rated them so far. Auxiliary Force. It's just a bad it's just a bad ability for a good player. It will allow you to deploy extra units if you lose units. So if you lose a unit that's worth 4 core slots, you could then immediately deploy from your auxiliary force another unit that's worth 4 core slots, and thus this would have a power of 4 core slots. But a lot of this hinges on you taking losses, which is that's not good. You don't want to take losses at all. You don't want to lose anything. So, yeah, I don't know how I feel about this ability. I just don't think it's very good, and I would literally give it a core slot rating of 0, unless you lose units and you want to shuffle units in, or you have you want to use your auxiliary forces like a giant amount of meat and throw it in front of the enemy. But this does not allow you to deploy any extra units. If it allowed you, and this ability is subject to change, but I'd be amazed if it changed, because if it allowed you to deploy 50% more units, then it would be the best ability in the game, full stop. It would, you start with like 53 or 56 core slots, and then you could deploy an extra 26 core slots worth of power onto the battlefield. My god. This would be the most powerful ability in the game if it allowed you to do that. But currently it does not allow you to do that. It just allows you to shuffle units in and out as required. And that's not really that useful. You want to deploy the right units from the offset, and you don't want to lose any. So, yeah. Not good. Big fat 0 from me. Oh, and speaking of another ability that deserves a 0, you get twice as much prestige when forcing enemy units to surrender, and twice as much captured equipment. The thing is, with captured equipment, you have to buy it. You don't just get given it and then you can sell it or use it as you see fit. You actually have to buy it back even though you captured it, which is... So, why would you... And a lot of it is substandard compared to the stuff that you have. So why would you even bother? I don't get it. And the prestige that you get is some small fraction of the amount that's surrendered and the unit's value. And a lot of the units that surrender easily, like infantry, infantry are known to surrender easily. Often artillery and anti-aircraft guns are quite fragile and tend to just die rather than surrendering. And tanks are quite difficult to make surrender. You'll generally gain very little prestige out of this. You generally get very little prestige out of surrenders, full stop. And it's a 2-pointer. I would say you maybe get 1 or 2 core slots worth of prestige out of this per battle, if that. If you really engineer it so that you can get people to surrender all the time, maybe you've got some special heroes that enable surrendering, this could be very powerful for the prestige. But for the captured units, it's totally worthless. So I would give this a value of about 3 core slots, maybe up to 6 or more, if you have some ability to really leverage surrenders. Which is going to lead us to something which I think is probably one of the most powerful abilities in the game other than Liberator. So, Deadly Grasp, it's honestly trash. Encircling the enemy prevents them from regenerating ammunition. It ruins their supplies, basically, and allows you to starve them out. But in a lot of the German campaign, you want to be killing, and capturing. You don't have time for encirclements. You just don't. I mean, you might have time to set the encirclement up, but you don't have time to actually wait for the enemy to run out of fuel and ammunition before you move in. You need to get in there. Although, you know, with artillery and strat bombers, you might be able to force the issue. And encirclement does keep suppression high. Suppression is not recovered in an encirclement. So if you encircle a city and all the enemies become suppressed, then the moment you touch them, they'll surrender. There is a potential for making a fair bit of prestige there if you can get a big encirclement on a huge city or something. But it's all pie in the sky, because you're going to spend 2 turns setting up the encirclement on the enemy city. Okay. Then you're going to spend another at least 1 or 2 turns bombarding the defenders and burning their supplies or whatever. And then you're going to move in and capture and get all that prestige and take very few casualties, and that's going to be great. And you'll have wasted 5 or 6 turns doing that. And you'll find that the maps are not so forgiving that you have the time to actually do that. And then move on to other objectives. The maps are very, very optimally designed, and you, generally speaking, maybe have only 1 or 2 turns spare to what you need to be doing, to the actual pace that you need to maintain. So, unfortunately, the encirclement system is all well and good, but it takes too long. You don't have time for it. In the situations where you do have time, you might get some value out of this, but I doubt it. So, in terms of the extra power that provides, in the right situation, it could provide a good, say, 4 to 8 core slots worth of value. And what I mean by that is units being bombarded by artillery and strat bombers don't recover. So while enemies are trapped in the encirclement, you could consider each turn you're getting additional core slot value out of your artillery and strat bombers. So you might have 6 core slots worth of artillery and 4 core slots worth of strat bomber, and that applies 10 core slots worth of force to the enemy on one turn. That 10 slots worth of force is kept, and then the next turn in the encirclement you dump another 10, so now it's 20, and the next turn you dump another 10, and that's 30. By that point you probably just want to go in there. But this, you know, the situation where that occurs is going to be rare and marginal, and if you could get away with it, you could just bring another artillery piece to the party and attack on the first turn, which is something you probably need to do in most engagements, right? Because nobody has got time for this. Ain't nobody got time for Deadly Grip. But hey, maybe someone out there can find good utility for it, but there are a lot of maps on a tight schedule, and you're going to get no use out of this whatsoever. So on some maps, this is going to have a core slot value of 0, and I don't want to take any ability that is potentially a 0 utility ability on a map. Right. Flexible command. The unit splitting thing is just garbage. It allows you to split your units into smaller stacks so that you can do encirclements more easily. The problem is, it makes your units incredibly vulnerable to attack and is not worth the trade-off of setting up an encirclement, especially since if there's any gaps in your encirclement, the enemy can just walk through them to get out. And also, if you're splitting your units to 5 stacks or 7 stacks if they're infantry, if you're splitting your units, you are inviting the enemy to attack them and break your positions. I would never, ever split any of my units. It just seems like a horrible idea. It's the inverse of overstrength. You're actually weakening your army doing this. And the fact that it doesn't consume slots to do it does not make it any better, in my opinion. Does not in any way improve the unit splitting ability. It could have been free without this perk, and I still almost would never do it. So, yeah, 0. Avoid. Like plague. It's inverse core slots. It actually makes your army weaker, potentially. It invites you to lose units that you potentially might never have lost. Avoid like the plague. Right, Killer Team. Potentially one of the most core slot powerful abilities on this list, other than Liberator, with a potential core slot value of 15 or more. Why such a high core slot value for this unit? Well, for this ability. The heroes are, some of them are incredible. They're absolutely bonkers. They're so good. For example, there's a hero that decreases the core slot cost of a unit by 50%. So you assign this hero to, let's say you have a 6 core slot artillery. You assign this hero to your artillery. That artillery now costs you 3 core slots instead of 6, saving you 3 core slots. Now if you overstrength that artillery, so it costs 12 core slots now instead of 6, the 50% discount is going to knock 6 slots off. So you can have a maxed out overstrength artillery for 6 slots instead of 12, saving you 6 core slots. If you had 3 of that hero, you could potentially save yourself 18 core slots. And that's just on that artillery that costs 6 core slots. I'm sure that there will be units later on in the game that are even more pricey and even more powerful. And that's just one hero from a grab bag of overpowered hero abilities out there. So the core slot rating on this is going to be huge. And the thing is, you get your heroes at the start of the campaign. So you can just re-roll them until you find a set that you like. You can just restart your campaign a few times, get a few different rolls, and actually find some heroes that you like the sound of. They have huge potential, some of them. Have massive core slot potential that's easily translatable into pure power. So, we'll have a look at Killer Team after I've just gone through the last couple here, because I want to show you some of the abilities. They're crazy. Anti-Air Veteran. I want to love this ability, and it actually has a really high core slot value, I think, potentially. If for some reason you are running Denied Air Force, this becomes a mandatory pick. 100% mandatory. Even more mandatory than Liberator. Anti-aircraft guns tend to do 1 kill and like 4 or 5 suppression. Or if they do like 2 kills and 7 to 8 suppression, like really powerful anti-aircraft guns. So what this does is it potentially makes your aircraft 3 or 4 times better. So if you have a core slot value anti-aircraft gun of like 2 or 3, or you bought the Pack 88, which is like 4 core slots, I think. Quite an expensive piece of kit, that. You are timesing that value by 4. So your anti-aircraft gun that you paid 4 core slots for has the killing power of like 4 anti-aircraft guns. So that's that's 16 core slots worth of power in one anti-aircraft gun. When you buy an anti-aircraft gun that costs only 2 core slots, it has the potential killing power of 4 anti-aircraft guns at the same price. So 8 core slots. So if you are using anti-aircraft guns as your primary, as your anti-aircraft solution is anti-aircraft guns rather than fighters, the core slot value of this is potentially huge. Now, the issue is, German fighters are really cheap. They're really cheap. So you really actually want to rely on fighters as your anti-aircraft, because they're faster and they are more powerful. Well, they're as powerful as anti-aircraft guns with this perk. And, you know, they're quick and you can just hunt down the enemy with them. You don't have to worry about their position or anything. Fighters are incredibly difficult to kill, etc, etc, etc. Fighters are so good that anti-aircraft guns almost feel like they have no place in the game, really, which is unfortunate for them. But if you were running Denied Air Force, then this becomes a mandatory pick. You would get this, and you would deploy more anti-aircraft guns. And instead of them doing, 1 kill and 4 suppression, they're going to get 5 kills every time the enemy attacks. So the enemy air force is going to be massacred. Yeah, whatever you're using in terms of core slots for anti-aircraft guns, multiply it by 4, and that's the core value of this pick, which could potentially be huge. But you're probably better off relying on fighters, because fighters are actually much better units for getting rid of aircraft, and for reasons beyond my understanding, in terms of core slots, they're actually cheaper. I'll show you what I mean as we have a look at Killer Team. And finally, perimeter control. Not usually the biggest deal for you, because you are the attacker, and that usually gives you the potential to surround the enemy while they just sit there and wait for their inevitable demise. A lot of the missions for the Germans is just about the enemy trying to buy time while you steamroll across the map. And this won't cut down too much time for you. Generally speaking, it will not allow you to apply extra power where you wouldn't have been able to apply power. Generally speaking. But if it lets you get one more unit into position to attack, then the core slot value of this is whatever that unit was worth, right? If it allowed a tank to attack where previously it couldn't, that's 3 or 4 core slots worth of power there. If it allowed an infantry, a pioneer, to attack where perhaps they couldn't have, then that's 4 core slots worth of value there. So this actually potentially has good value, and it's only 1 point. It's probably one of the highest scoring ones for just a single point, and there's some potential there. But it's not exactly allowing you to ignore zone of control. You have to actually put a unit in position first, and then move another unit in after. And it only cancels the zone of control that the first unit is touching. So if you have infantry in a city and artillery behind, if you move a scout car to deny the zone of control of the infantry, you still will have trouble circling around, because the artillery will still project its zone of control. Unless you move the scout car so it's touching both of them. So it's not as great as you would think it is, but there is value there. You could probably assign a core slot value of this to this ability of maybe 3 to 6, maybe a little bit more in a big battle or something, but potentially it has no value on certain turns. So one to think about, since it only costs a single point, it has reasonably high value for a single point, and I would definitely consider it. Right. Killer Team. I just want to show you some of these because they're crazy. Hit and run. When attacking, enemy units with lower initiative do not shoot back. That's huge. So that means if you have a high initiative tank and you attack the infantry in a city, who generally speaking have lower initiative, they will not fire back, and you will take no casualties. That's massive. That's, that's huge. That gives you that effectively could potentially save you many core slots worth of casualties on any unit you equip it to. Oh, ignores entrenchment. God, could you imagine combining that with the other one? Can you imagine a tank with both of these? So you attack the city, you ignore entrenchment, and massacre the defenders, and they don't even get to shoot back. These two together would turn a tank, would increase the value of a tank to like 2 or 3 times the, its capability. Like, with one tank, you would achieve what 3 or 4 tanks would be able to achieve without these abilities. In fact, in the early game, if you attack a city with a tank, you would take like 8 losses. But with these two, you would take no losses. So almost infantry and city could massacre an infinite amount of tanks, increasing the core slot value of these two heroes hugely. Aggressive counterattack. +3 attack when defending. That's not so great. It's okay though. Perhaps good for a guy in the city. So let's have a look at these two things which I just wanted to show you. So, you know, fighters only cost 110 prestige. They have quite a high core slot cost of 3, but it's only 110 prestige. They're very cheap. You know that anti-aircraft guns, while having lower core slot value generally speaking, are considerably more expensive. So, unfortunately, although anti-aircraft veteran is a fantastically powerful ability, and it would turn a lot of these into absolute killers, you probably just want fighters, because they're very cheap. Even if the core slot value on them is high, you pay a premium in core slots, but in terms of getting inexpensive enemy aircraft kills, you can't really go much better than these. I mean, that said, you might want to take some anti-aircraft guns that are cheap core slot wise and overstrength them. I mean, you can actually go up to 12 overstrength for free. They're so cheap. So yeah, as I said, you know, anti-aircraft veterans got some real potential for high core slot value, but that does mean giving up aircraft and just deploying nothing but anti-aircraft guns. But since the core slot value on them is quite low, you could get 3 of these for every fighter plane, or 1 of these for every fighter plane. But just remember that they're incredibly pricey. And unlike fighter planes, they can't just run 40 tiles away to hunt down some enemy bomber that's in the middle of nowhere. Right, so anyway, let's go back to these two heroes that I just got. So, this tank has got a core slot value of 3, obviously. Let's buy it and put it down. Okay. Now let's buy another tank which has a core slot value of 3. Okay, let's put it down. Now let's buy another tank that has a core slot value of 3. Okay, let's put it down. Now, let's equip. Let's equip one of these dudes. Go away. With our heroes. Hit and run. And ignores entrenchment. Right. So, look at the difference. This is a tank without the heroes. Okay? 2 kills and 8 casualties. I'm going to be murdered. And that means, you know, if I then followed it up with this one, I'm gonna lose potentially 15 tanks. So like 4.5 core slots worth of units plus the money that I paid to buy them. I'm gonna lose all that value, and I'm only gonna do like 4 or 5 casualties to this 15 stack. Well, that sucks. But now look at the difference that this guy makes. Now, I deal 4 damage to them and I take no losses. None. Wow. What a difference. That's huge. That's really huge. I mean, it saves me 8 losses straight off the bat. This attack is potentially something that a whole set of like 30 tanks could not take this city without unbelievably painful and massive losses. But thanks to this hero, you could hammer it down. I mean, I'm still going to take 5 here and probably another 3 there. So we have actually enabled this ability, this this vehicle has been enabled to actually be incredibly overpowered. And in fact, you know, building on that, let's go with Killer Team again. You'll get the same ones if you just restart the mission instead of actually doing a new campaign. You'll get the same ones. If you have a look at something that's actually got massive infantry killing potential, I believe this one is your preferred anti-infantry killer because it's got a rapid fire 1.5x, and you overstrength that bad boy. Okay, and we stick our heroes on here. Okay, and we'll add a default overstrengthed one just to show you. But you wouldn't overstrength, you know, a standard one. You're overstrengthening here to get value out of your hero. So, in deployment, yes, okay. So this one now is our standard overstrength one. 4 casualties and 8 losses, because this thing is a vicious infantry killer. But you're still going to take massive losses. 7 kills, no losses. Disgusting. You know, that's huge. Now, our standard tank can do 5-3. And this battle has gone favourably for us. And we've actually cleared the city with only 3 tank losses. And we didn't have to use engineers. That's huge. Now, I'm just going to run Killer Team again, because I just want to show you guys some of the other heroes, if I can get them. Because there are even more crazy ones out there. This is what I mean by this one ability. I just wanted to cover it in a little bit more depth, because some of these are absolute madness. Provocateur. Adjacent enemies attacking other friendly unit will attack this unit instead. That has some potential if you have a unit that's really hard to kill. But I actually don't rate that one that highly. Still, it's got potential. 1 initiative to all adjacent friendly units. Actually really useful for infantry. Infantry have all got around 3 or 4 initiative, and 1 extra point is actually quite useful. Unfortunately, it doesn't affect the unit itself. So you might actually want to stick this on a recon car. But the only thing is, if you put it on a recon car, if the car dies, the hero will be killed. So, gotta be careful. All adjacent enemy units get 3 suppression at the beginning of their turn. Useful if you've stopped near somebody. But I wouldn't rate any of those to be that great. But there are some terrifying ones out there. There's one in particular I'm thinking of that forces units to always retreat, and another one that makes retreating units always surrender. When you combine the two, you get something just absolutely perverse. Cheap replacements. Replacements of battle cost the same as on deployment phase. So good for infantry. Infantry cannot function unless a lot of the time it can't function very well unless the squad is full. And this allows you to keep your infantry topped up for the inevitable press into the enemy cities. This one's kind of garbage because it doesn't affect the unit that's carrying it. You could put it on a recon, I guess, once again. Ah! This is the one I was talking about. Unit slot cost is reduced by 50%. How massive is that? So if you've got that glorious overstrength 6-pointer artillery, you can reduce its core slot cost by 6, which is absolutely massive. And later on in the game, I'm sure there will be other units that are potentially very good for that. Anything that's got a high core slot cost, which early on in the game is not actually that much. But, you know, buy one of these. buy one of these artillery pieces and stick it on there in the early game. And in the late game, there'll be tanks with big core slot costs, which you will save even more core slots. Really, really good. Really powerful. Yeah, there's loads more. Definitely a great pick. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope throughout all of this you found it useful, and since this is the beta and everything is subject to change, hopefully this concept of assigning core slot power to picks will help you decide what to take. A lot of the negative picks, just going back to it, a lot of the negative picks, they don't have like anti-core slot value a lot of the time. You know, apart from inept logistics, which just literally reduces your core slots, which is quite painful. You got 50 core slots and you're going to lose 10% of them. That's a negative value of 5 core slots. Which, you know, actually potentially not that bad when combined with something like Panzer General. Because with enough tank deployment, you'll get value between those two. But a lot of these are just restrictions on what you can do. Rather than reducing your power by taking core slots away from you, there are actually more restrictions on abilities that you can use and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of them are really painful. So I might go over these at some other point. If you guys are interested in this kind of guide, I might go over the negatives. Some of them are just free gimme, like inefficient supply. You're almost never going to get encircled, so it's not a big deal. Potentially chaotic fire as well, but I'm not sure I'd want to combine that with inefficient supply. Then you might really run out of ammo. Yeah, but generally speaking, most of them are just things that stop you from doing stuff. You know, denied Air Force doesn't necessarily have a core slot cost to you. It just means you can't buy aircraft. You're still going to spend your core slots on something else. Probably artillery and anti-aircraft guns. But nevertheless, every unit has its place. And so not having access to a particular unit might be very painful. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I don't know why I picked flexible command there. That was dumb. I was going to put on killer and see if there was any other heroes here that were worth looking at. Aggressive counterattack, nah, that's not that great. Ignores entrenchment is huge on infantry or tanks. Entrenchment killer times 4. Well, that's a nice combination with ignores entrenchment, because it allows the your other units to follow up. So yeah, lots of potential there. I hope this was useful to you guys. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something, and I will see you guys next time.